Welcome to 10 Minutes On, a podcast from the Joint Public Issues team. My name's Sienna. I'm a Joint Public Issues team parliamentary intern, and joining me today is our team lead, Simeon Mitchell. So, an election's been called. We've all been caught kind of off guard, and it's very exciting, slightly nerve-wracking. I imagine that everyone's feeling a few emotions, maybe just resignation and apathy. But today, we are going to be discussing how we as congregations and as the church can be responding. So, Simeon, what do you think that the election should mean for Christians and for the church? What should churches and congregations be doing during this election period?
Well, Sienna, our big headline is that we're calling on people to love, to pray and to vote. And those summarise, I suppose, the ways that we think Christians as individuals and churches as groups of Christians working together might want to engage with this election. Talking about love, which is thinking about how we love our neighbours as we think about the issues, the things that will guide our decision-making and our voting, and particularly concerned about the real vulnerable members of our community and those that we are called to serve and to love. Praying, because we should surround any process like this. It's just an important moment in our national life with prayer and praying for the candidates and praying about how we each choose to use our votes. And then voting itself, it's a really important thing. It's a hard-won privilege. In many parts of the world, people aren't able to do it. So I think people have got a real responsibility to vote. And also, we can work as churches to ensure that there aren't barriers to people participating in the electoral process by making sure that people have got registered to vote, have got the right ID, and are enthused about turning up and exercising their democratic rights. So, love, pray and vote. That's what we're saying for this election.
Fantastic. I think we'll come back to some of the stuff around voter registration later. But before we do, there's a lot that's on the political agenda. There's going to be a lot of issues that are flying around. There are loads of issues facing the UK as a whole and as the world more generally. Are there any specific issues that you think that Christians and the church should be focusing on or considering as they think about how they vote or how they engage with the general election?
Well, the big issue that the Baptist, Methodist and the United Reformed churches are saying should be really high on the political agenda and high on in our thoughts when we're thinking about the election, but isn't really being paid enough attention to, is poverty, and particularly poverty in the UK. Our churches have been instrumental in creating the Let's End Poverty movement, which is trying to build up the public will and the political will to get poverty tackled in the UK. 1 in 5 people in our communities are currently experiencing poverty. There's over 1 million children who are living in destitution at the moment. These figures are not normal and they're not right. It's a huge problem. It's causing immense harm to people, but it's not inevitable. As Christians, we believe it's not what God wants for people's lives. And as campaigners, we recognise it's a consequence of political choices and political priorities. So we're saying that anyone who strives to form the next government should be telling us what they're going to do to tackle poverty in the UK in particular. Of course, we recognise that poverty is not the only issue that is of concern to many of us. There are all sorts of issues, and for each of us, they will be different. As churches and as JPIT, we work across 6 hopes for society, and we've thought about what we would want to see happen in relation to any of those 6 hopes in this election campaign. And we've produced a briefing that people can find on the website, which sets out some of those issues, and perhaps also questions that you might want to ask candidates about each of those things, whether it's where we go next with tackling the climate crisis, or how should we be treating refugees and asylum seekers, which is such a big political topic at the moment. And all of those resources can be found on the JPIT website.
So if, after hearing this podcast or just more generally, churches are wanting to engage in the general election, you've spoken about the 6 hopes that JPIT has, but what can churches be doing to engage in the election?
Well, I think there's a couple of other ways that we would really like to see churches engaging with this electoral process. And the first is to become champions for voter registration. There's a real issue at the moment, which we've covered on a previous podcast, about not everyone being registered to vote and not everyone having the right ID to participate. And the people who are most likely to not be able to participate are actually some of those people whose voices we really need to hear in the electoral process, people who are often on the margins of things, people who are disadvantaged in different ways. So we think churches have got a particular role to play in enabling people to register to vote. And we as churches are part of this initiative called Voter Registration Champions. And we're suggesting that churches might hold a voter registration Sunday at some point in the next few Sundays, where they just make sure that everyone in their congregation has been asked, are you registered to vote? And if not, here's how you can do it. You could have some laptops or tablets available so people can actually do it there and then, and check whether everyone in your community or your congregation is registered to vote. And also check whether people have got the form of photo ID that they will need to vote. This is a new requirement in general elections, that you've got to take some photo ID with you. Most people will have that, but not everyone will. And if you haven't, then you can apply for a free certificate from your local authority, but you'll need to get that arranged. And again, churches might be able to help people with getting ID if they haven't got that. So that's the first big thing, voter registration. Again, there are resources on the website that help people, will help churches to do that. It's a really simple but effective way of enabling democratic participation from people in your community. And then the second role that we think churches have to play is in offering hospitality to their community, to invite people in for hustings or election meetings where people can have an informed, respectful debate about the issues, where they can meet the candidates and discover something about what drives the candidates and have a conversation about the issues that are important in the local community. So many churches will have hosted hustings in the past, and we really would like to encourage churches to work together, ideally ecumenically, locally, in hosting hustings or different kinds of question type, time type events. We've worked with a range of other churches, denominations and ecumenical bodies to produce some guidance on hustings. There are some really straightforward do's and don'ts, some options to think about in terms of the format of the event, and ways to make sure it's all done in accordance with the electoral regulations, which some people sometimes get a bit worried about. But it's nothing to be scared of. It's a really good opportunity to invite your community into the space to be part of having a kind of an active debate about the issues in the lead up to the election. So yeah, hold a hustings.
What are the rules about what churches can and can't do during the election period? Would you be able to summarise some of that?
So the quick headlines are, if as an individual, please participate fully in the election process. There's no regulation on what individuals do. But if people are office holders in the church, ministers, or hold some recognised responsibility for the church, and the churches themselves have there are some extra responsibilities. First, because churches are all charities, either registered charities or exempt charities, so they're subject to laws all the time in relation to political campaigning, which means that they can't be party political spaces. They can't be backing particular parties or candidates. So that applies all the time. In the period running up to an election, there are some additional regulations which mean that you have to be really careful just about being balanced in anything that you say or do publicly in relation to the election, candidates, and policies that are associated with particular parties. None of that should be a real concern. It's not difficult to navigate. But the important thing is, if you're doing something like holding a hustings, you've got to make sure that you don't just exclude some candidates because you don't like them politically or agree with them politically. You've got to have clear, impartial reasons for deciding who you invite and who you don't invite. Not saying you have to invite everyone, but there have to be objective reasons why you've chosen to include some people and not others, for instance. The guidance on the website does go into all of that. And I should say, I'm not the legal expert, so do refer to the guidance rather than what I've just said now as the authority on these issues.
Thank you, Simeon. It's been great chatting to you about how we can be responding to the election. Once again, if you are wanting to get involved, think about holding a hustings, think about becoming a voter registration champion. If you are looking for resources, the website that you should go to is jpit.uk/elections. That's jpit.uk/elections. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it around. Thank you so much for listening.